I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I am Ben Detrick. Jordan Redaelli is on vacation. Andrew Kuo takes no days off. Andrew, how are you, buddy? It is hump day.
It is hump day, groundhog day, all the days, and what is it, Taco Wednesdays? I love it. It's like all the best parts of your week in every day and throughout the week.
Ah, man, I love a good hump day.
Yeah.
This is the hump day special for the Cookies listener.
Can't wait for that weekend, which starts in a few hours, man.
I like that we've resorted to naming shows after days of the week. Hoarding Tuesdays, the Hump Day Special, what was it? Sex Thursdays? Horny Thursdays? Whatever.
Keith Van Horny Thursdays.
Yeah, it just goes on. Days unending.
It's proof of life, right? Like, we have to do it or else it never happened.
I mean, for all we know, well, for all the public knows, we're just re-upping the same pod every day with a new title, just according to the day of the week. Oh, it's Casual Fridays on Cookies. Great.
I'm well rested, mostly because
thank God.
Because I watched Plot Against America last night and got all my fucking sleep in.
I feel somewhat responsible, not for this Plot Against America, but that I encourage you to watch it while only watching one episode myself and bailing, and then leaving you floundering in David Simon's latest creation for the last month.
In what universe would I not watch a show that's on TV now?
That's a fair point.
You're off the hook. Although I've considered stopping this show because it is so brown. It's wild. It's like living in a sepia
You
tone.
never give up on a show.
No.
You'll give up on all types of things, but not a show.
No.
That's a bridge too far.
Well, also because I kind of don't really watch shows. I either nap or do other work, like look up stats, like I'm always doing something. So that's why I can't watch anything with subtitles, because I'm not really looking at the screen the whole time.
You'll give up on pizza before you give up on Westworld. That's the kind of TV watcher you are.
Well, if Westworld was dangerous to somebody, I would give up on Westworld.
It's dangerous to robots.
I went to try to buy a slice from my spot at Williamsburg Pizza last week, and they're not serving slices anymore. They're boarded up and they're just doing pie delivery.
Paulie G's slice spot in Greenpoint still doing slice hand to hand.
Respect, man. Are there still people lining out the door for it?
They don't have anyone inside. It's just a window. I feel like that's most places now that are doing anything. Like the Commodore, a beloved Williamsburg establishment.
Best nachos in New York City.
They just have a window now. I don't think anyone's really like come inside and pick shit up. No one's into that.
Where I live in Lower Manhattan, there's like kind of a depressing scene out there because a lot of people with schizophrenia and mental illness are like on the streets. And I saw a couple of local businesses here kind of like try to open and then close when they realize like the streets are weird here, like in near the Williamsburg Bridge. And full disclosure, there's like a methadone clinic on Delancey and Essex, I believe. And a lot of people who need help are in this neighborhood throughout the year, all the time. And I kind of recognize a lot of them, and I give them money every other day. And they're familiar faces in my neighborhood, and I see them out there. Like I went out there on Saturday, and I saw the same faces, and I wonder who's helping them, man.
It's a rough time to be a homeless person in general. It's also an extremely rough time to have been subsisting off of, say, begging for money. Like,
Yeah.
I see people doing that. I'm like, I'll give them like a shake of the head or something. Like, I just don't really feel comfortable coming close to you, man. You're outside, you're coming in contact with people all the time. I just don't want to be near you. And like, I feel gross about it because, I don't want to deny people their humanity, but they'll like come up and like knock on your car window and you're like, dude, I can't lower my window. Like, I would like to give you something, but like, you're living an extremely perilous existence already. I just can't introduce that right now.
Yeah, and
I feel shitty about it.
Oh yeah, there's nothing good about this whole interaction, and I think people who find themselves in times of need sometimes suffer from like a lot of it's schizophrenia, and it's hard for someone to like. We always say read the room, like they're in a different room and it's none of their fault. And I feel like my first reaction is like, who is helping these people? And then I immediately turn to like, who is helping us?
Right. I mean, part of it is what makes it feel harrowing going to the grocery store or just going around the streets of a place like New York where there are masses of humanity, albeit far fewer than in the past, is that you don't know how other people are responding to this. You don't know if other people are being reckless, and you don't want to absorb their risk. And that's what it comes down to. Like, if I come near you, I start absorbing your risk. Like, the closer I come, the more your behavior over the past week and a half is now inflicted upon me. And in the case of people like who are on the bleeding edge here, of people who are deeply vulnerable and unsafe, man, that's asking a lot. It is,
and it kind of. I was in the supermarket last 2 runs ago, and a bunch of people who don't necessarily look like they shop at that supermarket. It's a dollar store supermarket. It's pretty the playing field is level there, and but they looked like they don't usually shop for groceries, and they kind of looked like they were looking to just like boost something, and the employees were like, hey, can we just watch out for these guys? And I'm like, the way we treat humanity and our own humanitarian point of views are changing so fast on the fly. And I always joke with my circle of friends being like, if there's a raft, who would be on the raft? And we always talk about our skills and like what we can provide. You just dig a ditch and throw me in because I'm not that strong and I have glasses. It's like, we've talked about this. But it made me think of Bloomberg and his whole policy of stop and frisk that he was so wrong about. But you could see the rationale with everybody right now, right? Like, we're reduced to our most inhumane person to person.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily is the same thing. I mean, we're talking about a time when the rule of like law is social distancing. So coming in contact with someone who is homeless or extremely vulnerable is like also, it's like the same as if you just know someone. You're not supposed to come within 6 feet of your friend. So, I can't compare it to stop and frisk, although I know what you're saying,
Yeah, it's loose. I think stop and frisk was based off of statistics that were looked at incorrectly. But I also think that
I just mean stop and frisk is a completely immoral, racial profiling law. They're not necessarily the same.
It's not a law issue. It's a socioeconomic issue. It's not like why your hands are in your pockets kind of thing. It's always like, why do we create this wealth disparity in our city? What are we doing to help communities? It was a larger discussion than like stop and frisk, literally.
I mean, I don't know what the options are for, say, homeless people in New York, because you look at the photos of what's happening in like Las Vegas or San Francisco, And these people aren't being ushered into empty hotels. They're being herded into gyms and in taped off squares that are about 6 feet apart from each other and supposed to sleep in like a checkerboard. And you're like, that doesn't seem any better than being on the street. If anything, perhaps more dangerous.
Yeah, you're better off on the street at that point. But I don't think society is built to support this, we just don't have the correct infrastructure to do this. We barely have the correct infrastructure for places like methadone clinics that help their communities, get through their issues. And I think even when it comes to garbage pickup or the mail, I don't know if any society is really equipped for something as big as this. And I woke up today and the first thought that came to my mind was I'm worried about the food supply chain more now than anything. And we talked about it yesterday, but it's been popping up in the news a bit and it's happening. And I can't believe the local government and the big government didn't have a plan.
Sure. But you can believe it because of who is in charge in the national government. If you defund the organizations that are supposed to plan for these things, lo and behold, there's no plans. If you're a basketball team and you get rid of your scouting department and then the draft comes up and you're like, oh, I don't know who to take. Well, yeah, you got rid of the scouting department, my guy.
Yeah, and we've always talked about before, for example, the Knicks, I think, really benefit from the system, and they should do nothing. They should still do nothing and let this. And what I mean by nothing is not care about wins, use the lottery balls, pick the best player, do that over and over until they get a Ben Simmons. And there's certain teams like the Sixers who absolutely have to strike now, right? And they have to get the Jimmy Butlers. And they were on pace to win a chip last season, and it didn't work out for 28 other teams. But I think right now when we see how stuff's going down with the PPP and our food supply, you guys are the Sixers. You have to do something. The structure of America isn't like the structure of the NBA rules. You cannot be the Knicks right now. You have to be the Sixers.
But it's also comes down to who's your GM. Mm-hmm. And what are your interests? What do the owners want? Who's answering to whom?
Right.
And you could say, look, the federal government is doing something. You might not like what they're doing. Oh, they are giving money out left and right. There is a torrent of cash spewing out of Washington and going all over the place. They are in action. They are doing stuff. But they are signing Tobias Harris.
I know, man. Yeah, and I wish our government would sign Tobias Harris. At least a net zero is better than what we have now.
No, it's true. These are far worse contracts than Toby's.
Yeah, we're getting Andre Bargnani's.
Yes, using a clumsy basketball metaphor, I would not accuse the Trump administration of not doing things. They didn't do shit in February, but they are doing the wrong things. To your point, maybe it's better to do nothing sometimes than do the wrong shit, which is the Knicks problem. But this is more along the case of you're making bad decisions for bad reasons to benefit the wrong people, and that's happening. That is occurring. People aren't sitting on their hands right now. That's not the problem.
I think they are, and this is a very minute debate. This is tiny, but my issue with their performance is they're not doing anything. I'd rather them, like you said, to your point, I'd rather them do this than do the wrong thing, which they're absolutely capable of. But the PPP.
Well, who are we talking about here? Are we talking about the federal government, because they're clearly doing the wrong thing? They are in action. The money is going. There's no oversight.
Right. So that's a even finer discussion, and I agree there. But the PPP was a good idea. The $1 trillion stimulus was a good idea. It went to the wrong people, so that could be discussed in its own vacuum. But those things, I thought, yes, do that thing. Isolate all the money that you can possibly have and give it away. But then after that, what we're seeing in April, the month of April, is like they're arguing about procedure. And that's a really easy way to buy time. They're like filibustering as a whole because, when you have the smartest scientists on Earth say repeatedly that we don't know, it's hard for a government to do anything. But what I want them to do is to help people in need, help as many people in need as possible, and have a plan with our food supply chain and small businesses.
I just don't think you have, on a national level, people who have any interest in helping the most possible people or doing the right thing. I don't think that's even part of the calculus, because repeatedly we see that it is not. It has not governed anything to this point in terms of their policies pre-coronavirus or post. It literally is not part of the math. They're not like, how can we help the most possible people? They don't ask that. They don't care. It's how can we help the people we want to help? How can we benefit from this? How can we consolidate power? How can we look good? How can we influence public opinion about ourselves? There's no morality here. There's no benevolence. None of that shit. That's never been the governing principle of anything that the current administration does. So to look for it now and to say, in Joe Biden's vernacular, why won't he act like a president? What do you mean? Like, what does that even mean? Like, why won't he act like a president? This is who Donald Trump is as a president. This is who his administration is while he's in the presidency. These are exactly how he has acted as a, quote, president. So, like, I don't know. I don't really understand the sort of a sense of wonder towards why they're behaving a certain way, because this is who they are.
And I have a different take on, I think, humanity than that, but I understand that. I think like something I always think about is Ronald Reagan, right? And he denied AIDS for years and years, and people were screaming from the rooftops like, this is something that we have to take seriously. This is affecting a lot of people in a certain community especially. And his policy changed when his friend Rock Hudson died, and his whole policy on AIDS flipped, and he got the ball rolling on that, and many years later we see the effects of that. And I think it's going to take some sort of moment like that for this White House and even for this president. We were close. I believe Trump had a good friend in a real estate mogul in New York die, and he was kind of touched by that. But I mean, maybe this is just like a difference in the way me and you think, and I am certainly not going to say I'm right here, but I think like this thing has a possibility to capture the imagination of even the dumbest people in the White House, and it hasn't yet. So, it might not, but I am still, I'm listening and I'm watching. I'm waiting.
In the case of Reagan or Trump or anyone who requires a personal loss to feel empathy while inhabiting the highest, most powerful position in the planet is kind of a ghoul. Like, there's no other way around it. Like, yeah, all those people were dying in my country that I am presiding over. Well, my friend, well, that changes everything. Like, then you shouldn't be president. If you don't have empathy, like if you can't put yourself in the position to care about the constituents of the country, then you are like fundamentally unfit. I mean, maybe there's some technocrat world where it's efficiency ends up making the world better for everybody. But I just think that empathy and natural humanism is really valuable in a powerful figure. And the world sort of lacks those guys right now, and generally has over the course of history, because humanism and naked raw ambition to run enormous companies and societies generally don't go hand in hand.
Right, and the job doesn't really lend itself to that. And I think of George W. Bush and putting us into a war that was misguided, to put it kindly. But I think immediately of Obama and letting the opioids get out of control and not addressing the heroin epidemic ever. And, we've had so many of our close friends not make it. And it was on Obama's watch, and that was, I think, similar to the AIDS crisis.
I agree. And Obama's legacy is far more complicated now than it felt like during his final days in office. And for some of the reasons are in that, the Trump administration has rolled back things that he accomplished. And they were temporary blips of positivity, whether it's environmental policy, etc. His
Obamacare.
Exactly. Obamacare still exists, but we now see that it's,
It's being attacked.
It's being attacked, but it's also woefully, what's the phrase I'm looking for?
Undercooked.
Undercooked. It's a little underspiced. Doesn't have enough sazon.
It looks a little gray coming out of the oven.
Yeah, I think undercooked is a good way of phrasing it. But, and I think people on the left have come to regard Obama as far more of a moderate centrist than they viewed him a few years ago. And I don't mean people who were like dyed-in-the-wool socialists, who are always saying this about Obama. But I'm saying the consensus among people who are to the left or left curious is like, Obama maybe wasn't quite the usher of hope that we had believed he was when he, stepped into the national spotlight. So, but on this topic, Obama came out yesterday and kind of for the first time made a public statement about the primary. And this obviously happened after Bernie, stepped out of the race and endorsed Joe Biden himself. And Obama gave a very sort of interesting statement in which he seemingly kind of agreed with the things that Bernie has been advocating after Bernie left the race, while kind of encouraging the left to embrace Joe Biden, I guess, by default. It was an interesting position for him, who has said, I think my policies back in the past would make me a Republican. I mean, he said that. And to come out and sort of give a wink to the left and almost imply that he would have been more to the left now than he was back then, while endorsing Joe Biden, was an interesting tightrope for Obama to walk.
Yeah, I didn't read it quite that way, and I can see it now that you say it. I read it as par for the course. We could have written this maybe 5 months ago, and he was just waiting for Biden to get that passed through to the nomination. And I thought it was a pretty cookie cutter statement, which is expected. You don't want to go out there. He did attack Republicans in a way that was surprising to me, only because that's not really like in his nature. But it was interesting to him talk about Fox News, and it's weird. I think he's above Fox News. A former president, is above like a media network, but maybe not anymore. And maybe that's my naivete showing. But I thought he was a little. I thought his view was a little singular, is all.
Interesting. We've sort of seen the centrist position towards the left at this point already gathering steam of, are you saying you won't vote for Joe Biden? Like, how could you? How could you not vote for Joe Biden? Look at this administration. Children in cages at the border. The planet's on fire.
And I think that's just like a community of like 50 people on Twitter.
Blue check Twitter.
Maybe not even, I like blue check Twitter, so like whatever.
No, but I mean, these are people who are like Biden's. I've seen like Biden's, I don't know if it's communications
Biden
director,
bros?
but they're Biden bros, but they're not randos. They're like people who work for his campaign, already laying, to me, the groundwork to blame the left for not supporting Joe Biden enough.
Well, they're running a campaign where they want to win, so they're trying to get votes, right? So this is not surprising. This is just them trying to get votes. That's the name of the game. They don't care about Bernie. They're trying to convince people to vote for their guy.
Maybe. I think that is the way you could look at it and say this is an attempt to shame the left into voting for Joe Biden. But I think there is, in my opinion, a bit of a preemptive blaming of the left in the same way that a lot of centrists blamed Jill Stein and blamed Bernie for Hillary's defeat. That, she didn't get the same support from the left, and they betrayed her. And if they had voted for her, then none of this would have happened. And I think we're starting to see the groundwork being laid for that same claim. Because if they don't make that claim, then we say that Biden lost because he was a centrist. So it's both sides already sort of, constructing their walls and digging their trenches before November, because I don't think anyone's that confident in Joe Biden here.
I mean, no one should be confident against Trump. Trump is powerful, and he has a strong opportunity here. And it's so funny, as the minute he got inaugurated, all he had to do was be a little less nuts, and he could have just we could have had Trumps in office for 12 years. All he had to do was a little bit less than himself, but this is the lesson of the world, right? You can't run from your shadow. I'm don't do that and you're good to go. You're undefeated. But he got in his way, in his own way.
I don't have the same sort of respect/fear for Trump as a politician that you do.
Oh, he's going to get whooped. I think the Democrats are going to whoop him.
They might. I think Biden is a pretty terrible candidate who is not as uniquely bad as Hillary, because he doesn't inspire the same kind of negativity. I think Trump is just an abysmal candidate, and I think almost any Democrat would have trounced him. But Hillary really inspires passion from the wrong side. But in this case, I think, if for the left, I think Biden has to do some outreach. I don't think shaming the left is acceptable, because that's sort of been the strategy, whether it was under Clinton, under Schumer, under Pelosi. It's hey, we know you're not going to vote for Republicans because you have a moral compass, and we're your only option. The enemy of your enemy is your friend. And even though we are tacking right, we are trying desperately to get Reagan Democrats to vote for us. We're guided by the Schumer ideal of a household in Long Island. And that's who we're trying to get, because we know the leftists will fall into line, and we know black people will fall into line, that you don't have other options besides the Democratic Party. I honestly feel like the left should be a little bit reticent here. Make Joe Biden earn it. Don't be shamed and say, okay, fine, we don't want children in cages. Say, no, Biden, you have to win the left. If you want youth and our organization and our energy and boots on the ground and our money, you can't just have Obama come out and say, little wink, come on, left, universal health care, great ideas. Yeah. No, make a concession. Say, okay, universal health care. If Joe Biden did that, the left would get on board. If Joe Biden just did that and said, I'm not going to do shit differently, I'm going to be Joe Biden, but I'm going to add in universal health care, the left would be down. But right now, all they're really operating with is shame. And I do not think that is enough of a carrot to move the donkey cart of the left towards the center.
And it's interesting, and everyone who listens knows, you support Bernie Sanders, and I like Bernie Sanders as well. But
no, I support universal health care.
Okay, you support universal health care?
I
think that's a good idea.
That's what I'm saying. I support universal health care. I support Bernie Sanders because he's the only candidate who supports universal health care. In my mind, this is the moral crisis in America, amongst other ones, but is the most visible and the one that would help the most people immediately. And again, I like Bernie, but I like Bernie's policies. When Lauren, who also endorsed Biden today, which was not a surprise, when she was for universal health care, I gave her money. I would have voted for her. So, I'm not like a Bernie dude in that way. I think most people who like Bernie like his policies. It's not a cult of personality. It's universal health care. It's debt relief for students. And he's the only guy who's advocating those things. Sorry to interrupt you there. I'm just saying. It wasn't like, oh, I like Bernie, and Bernie switches up his stance. Like, Bernie went and endorsed Biden. I didn't say, okay, I'm endorsing Biden now. Not that my endorsement matters, but you know what I'm saying.
And I only framed it that way because I think...
How dare you?
we are... No, it's good for context, and I mean, I think this is kind of a wide open discussion, but I think the interesting thing with what we saw in the primary was ideology only gets you so far, and people don't, across the board, vote for ideology. They vote for... I mean, we discussed before, shout out to my buddy Kay, who put this idea in my head, but like Hillary Clinton is a kingmaker, and she ran against Obama, and Obama became a superstar, one of the most important Americans in the history of our country. And then in the same time, later on, she ran against Bernie Sanders in the primary and made Bernie Sanders a legitimate voice in our zeitgeist and our everyday thinking, far away from just being a senator in the Senate. And she also turned Trump into what we see now, which is a very important political historical figure, and this was all kind of based off of a dislike of Hillary Clinton. And this may be packaged into why a lot of people are resentful for the Democratic Party, because they've stuck behind Hillary Clinton for so long and created these stories. And I think what we learned in this primary, just through voting, is ideology is what makes people go to vote, but we don't really know how people vote until we see the results. And it turns out that ideas that you and me both like universal health care, I like UBI, all these things don't really translate to numbers. And Bernie Sanders was soundly defeated by Joe Biden. Well,
I would argue that disconnect bears investigation. Why do we see polls coming out of...
But polls are bad. We've known polls are bad forever. That's why there's whole podcasts about models and polling. And at the end of all the podcasts, they're like, if you don't really understand percentages like a mathematician, this is going to seem really weird to you because it's going to defy everything we just told you. But it's sort of like the 30% I always talk about, how statisticians said Trump had a 30% chance of winning based off of exit polls, based off of polling throughout the whole process. And that's too much. It was too big.
I'm talking about polls showing that Americans believe in ideas like universal health care.
But it turns out they don't vote that way.
But this is what I'm getting at. I'm saying I think there needs to be an investigation of why. Why would that happen? Why would you have Americans in both parties?
We'd get rich if we figure that out.
I don't think so. I think you end up Bernie Sanders.
Do you think it's a conspiracy?
Well, what would be the reason that people would think that why people would agree with universal health care but vote for Joe Biden? Like, why would that be? What would convince someone to say, this guy is offering me what I want, but I'm going to vote for the other guy, the spring chicken, Joe Biden? Like, what would convince someone that you don't vote for the guy who most clearly is going to do the things that you want out of a government to vote for someone else? Why would you do that?
Are you saying they told us the wrong results of the polls or the votes?
No, I'm saying what would convince a voter? Why would a voter say, I believe in what this guy is saying, but I'm going to vote for someone else? Why would voters do that?
Because I think the polling is always noisy, right? And people come out to vote. Like the black community came out and represented Joe Biden, and they didn't show up in the polls as much. And that was always a question mark leading up to these primaries.
I disagree with this. They have repeatedly done polls across the board that show that Americans want universal health care. That is
but
across the
maybe
board.
Not enough to vote for Bernie Sanders. You know what I mean?
But I'm saying why.
Because,
and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying why. Why would someone say, and I'm not even asking this as a rhetorical question. I'm looking for an answer. Why would someone say, Joe Biden, these are two old white guys. Joe Biden stands for nothing. He's not promising anything. except for decency.
I mean, these are all takes. Remember, like
Joe Biden didn't promise anything. He says decency.
I mean, yes, we're vacillating between opinion and like talking about stats.
But
so,
I'm asking you a legitimate question.
I'm trying to answer. Right, totally. Yes.
Why would Bernie Sanders have policies and a platform that are more popular than those of Joe Biden's, at least according to polls and what we've seen over the last 4 years? Better approval ratings, but people vote for Joe Biden instead. That's all I'm asking. And I think that is interesting to try to figure out why that occurred.
And like we'll never know how polling reflects actual votes, but they don't like Bernie Sanders. That's it.
Why not, though?
They like his ideas. It could be a number of things.
That's all I'm asking you. You keep talking about the polls. I'm asking you, why specifically are people in agreement with Bernie's ideas but not voting for him at the same level? That's all I'm asking.
And without creating an explosion on this pod, I think the politics framing him as a socialist hurt him. And he was not able to climb out from under that. And I also think the polling didn't account for a community that came out to support Joe Biden, and we knew that community was not polling. But the question mark is always who will come out and actually vote, and we don't know that in polling. So that's why
I would be very reluctant to say that black people who may or may not have been underpolled here are not in favor of universal health care at the same levels as the people who were polled. That would not be something I would immediately say is a factor here.
Listen, man, like Klay Thompson got hurt and Kevin Durant popped an Achilles and they lost, right? Like, it's like, I don't understand how they lost. Well, like, things happened on the way, and then now Kawhi Leonard's the champion. Like, Biden is...
But you still haven't given a satisfactory answer, in my opinion. And I'm not saying you have one, but other than saying, well, maybe the polls were wrong.
No, I keep on saying, like, they don't like Bernie Sanders. And they successfully, throughout the process, debated him into a corner, and he couldn't get out from under it. And this was...
What corner?
The socialist corner. And
But I'm saying, who did this to him? How did he get put in that corner?
The field.
That's all I'm saying here. Saying, to me, what is interesting and what puts us in the category of being more of a state that relies on electoralism to govern ourselves than like a free democracy is that people agreed with Bernie Sanders and then somehow voted for the other guy who was equally in age, was worse in terms of money, in terms of winning early states, in terms of ground game, in terms of enthusiasm, and yet people voted for that guy and who had a lousy history. And I'm saying why. And my thing is the DNC and the media. Those are who I target. And when I look at it and I say, this is the reason for a disconnect. That's just my opinion, is that the reason that Biden won this nomination was because of a concerted effort by the DNC and the Democratic Party and the media all working together to villainize the guy whose opinions resonated more with most Americans. And I think that's a shame. Well, anyway, you know what I'm ready for is the COVID era in pop culture. I'm so excited to relive our current socially distant moment 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Where are we going to see this the most? Is it going to be music? Is it going to be film? Is it going to be politics? Is it going to be the 9/11 that gets referenced constantly? Where does COVID keep showing up going forward?
I know, like most immediately would be like, the most immediate things would be like fashion and music, right? Like, does Lil COVID exist yet as a rapper? I hope soon. I'm already seeing, like, I was joking last night because one of my friends popped up on Instagram wearing a Aphex Twin mask. It's like, wow, I'm sure that existed before this went down, but people already, like, are the way visually, like, we're already seeing the impacts of COVID. And there's no doubt that there's, like, hundreds of COVID scripts getting written now, and I think we're gonna see it most in fashion.
As in like mask and face wear, like Margiela mask back.
Yeah, and like Instagram and things we can do at home and things we can create on our own. And I don't know, it's going to be like, I don't know, where do you see it? Where do you see it?
I mean, the thing is, we're adaptable creatures, and I feel like if all of a sudden in a month, like, whoa, it's gone. As, you know, it magically disappeared as the weather got warm. And we're back out there, and that was just all a terrible nightmare. I think it would vanish fairly quickly and would almost be sort of an odd footnote. But that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It seems more likely that this is something that's going to affect us for 18 months. You know, de Blasio was like, I think September. Yeah, people just kind of throwing numbers around, dates, prospective times when sports can start again. Maybe it will be gone. I don't know. But as long as this is enduring for a while, I do feel like we will have so much creative content that was made over this period of time because people have nothing to do or will reference it, that we'll get shows like what was the movie with Adam Driver, like The Marriage or The Divorce or whatever that shit was called, Marriage Story.
That's a good movie.
And we'll have like, it's a story of like a couple who met and then they were in quarantine. And like there's going to be so many of those like racing to get out once people can do things again. Or even now, it's like, can we get two people, actors, who are quarantined together and just shoot a movie about being in quarantine, and we'll get it out and we'll go pay-per-view. Like, you know, I think there's going to be a race for COVID content, and I think you're right. It'll be in fashion. It'll be face masks. It'll be gloves. It'll be this almost
fit pics,
like burqas,
yeah,
of protective hazmat suits. But I do think we'll see it as people try to figure out how to make new content now. Because at current, you can't put a film crew together. Maybe you could get animators to do something. You know, you can do split screens like the NBA tried to do with Horse, but you can't get people together to shoot a movie. So like, how do you create content for films or TV when you don't have sports? You can't use a set. And this could exist for, say, another year. I'm really intrigued by these ideas of like creativity under COVID, and not only, you know, the stuff that we'll see later when there's a heist movie about people wearing masks in an abandoned New York City and they like tunnel into the treasury to steal PPE. But I mean, it's going to be weird to see what stuff gets made right now too.
Yeah, and I think I subscribe to the idea that there's like a handful of stories that we all love, and I don't think there's a new COVID book, movie, play, TV show out there, because we have the idea of zombies, and we have the genre of isolation, space travel, and like if you kind of take COVID into like another step past what we're seeing, like how would someone make a thoughtful COVID movie? And you could almost slap COVID onto anything. Like, was Parasite about isolation and the effects of the pandemic on our class structure? Sure. So any movie made after this point is going to be about COVID, right? Like, it is a part of our DNA now. So I always joke, like, how come in my personal practice or my personal work, I don't make things that are overtly about my identity? And I'm always like, oh, I am me, so everything I make is my identity. But it's not an identity piece, it's just something I made. And I think, like, the NBA is going to be about COVID. So I almost see it as art imitating life, you know? And
yeah, and it can't be that literal, right? Because you can't say, all right, we're going to make, like, the movie Contagion or Pandemic or one of those things. Like, dude, I don't want to watch that. Like, no, thanks. I lived through that. So you actually have to use metaphor.
Mm-hmm. And you can apply to, you know, anything you're thinking about to it. And I think, I hope we get artworks that we can watch that are more like that. And I'm going to watch for sure I'm gonna watch The Purge featuring coronavirus. I'm gonna give it a shot. But there's, it's like we joked about it before. Do 100 Kurt Cobains bloom? Probably not. Does one? Probably.
But to your point, we're just going to start seeing COVID and everything. Like,
yeah.
If Castaway came out like classic COVID cinema, like The Wrath of Aguirre, like huge COVID energy in that one. So you're right, and what was the one with DiCaprio up roaming around Montana fighting bears? Like, oh, that's a COVID movie.
Exactly. Right.
Also, that's a comedy.
I like that. It's a survivalist comedy.
It's so obviously a comedy. It's by a comedy director. I think it's a comedy.
Is he humorous?
I mean, Birdman was clearly a comedy, right?
I never saw Birdman. Should I watch that? That seemed a little out of my zone.
I liked it.
Yeah,
it was pretty good. But to me, it was a comedy. What's the movie I'm even thinking of? He
won the Oscar.
Yeah, your guy DiCaprio. And everyone said he got raped by a bear, but he actually just fought bears.
Yeah, he just fought bears the whole time.
Whatever. The Deplorables, whatever the shit it was called.
Is there, okay, maybe we should switch this framing. Is there any movie out right now that isn't about COVID already? Is like...
The Invisible Man is about COVID.
Yes, I'm buying that.
Done.
Is The Marriage Story about COVID? Yes.
Absolutely.
An invisible enemy. Well, when you call it the invisible enemy, we're good.
The
we
Plot Against America. That's a COVID movie.
Right? Swap Nazis out for the invisible enemy. Wow, I could not stay awake. I was like, I'm going to stay awake during this entire 48-minute episode, and I was out at like minute 20.
You gave a good effort.
I tried.
So, switching awkwardly to a little bit of basketball chat here. I was kind of looking at some numbers. Just looking at numbers, as one does when they're really bored. And one that struck me as surprising was that Luka Doncic only shoots 31.8% from three, while attempting over 9 a game. That's arguably the worst high-volume shooting season in NBA history. And just using those two vectors. And I went and looked up some other similar ones. And this is not a shit on Luka discussion even. I was just kind of shocked that he put up 9.1 three-point attempts a game at 31.8%. And the only comparables in terms of guys who took that many threes and shot that poorly, you've got 37-year-old Kobe, who put up 7 at 28.5%. You've got Tim Hardaway Jr. on the Knicks, legend, who shot about the same as Luka Doncic on less attempts, so that's not worse. And Michael Adams, who is probably the worst of all time and shot 29.6% and took 8.5 when he was part of, I think, Paul Westfall's run and gun Denver Nuggets back in the early 90s. So shout out to Michael Adams being a complete chucker in an era that was not a remotely acceptable way of playing basketball. Like, complete forerunner for, guards who chucked a zillion threes and not at a high level. But anyway, we don't really hear about Luka being a mediocre shooter. We don't view him as one. But what gives with that? Being arguably the worst high-volume three-point shooter ever.
It's shocking to me. He shot 318, down from his rookie year at age 19 at 327, which also wasn't good. He shot 8 a year then too. And it makes me think of that great website, Cleaning the Glass, and Ben Falk. He has a preface on there being like, if you are taking that many shots and your usage is at a certain percentage, your overall numbers are going to bend a little bit, flatten a little bit, because the way defenses acknowledge you and the way the volume of which you shoot. So you have to look differently at players like Luka Doncic versus Nerlens Noel, who have different usage. And Nerlens maybe BPM 1 was extraordinary, but as soon as he gets more attention, it comes down, but he's still the great player he was. And I think Luka suffers from that issue, right? Like, is there an element in hero ball in every great player?
I mean, I think hero ball doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a bad shooter, but I get the comparison here, and that
you shoot through coverage, right?
Well, that high responsibility as an offensive scorer makes it tougher to be efficient. You know, you look at
For sure.
Jeremy Grant, sits around, is not covered when he takes threes, takes a few a game, and makes 40% of them. But I would not say that Jeremy Grant is a better shooter than Luka Doncic, because they're different kinds of shots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in general, high usage can be an enemy of efficiency, and that's also what makes guys like Harden and Doncic so special, is that even when they're not elite three-point shooters, they have other abilities, like finishing, getting to the foul line, making foul shots, and those make them in a composite incredibly efficient, or very efficient, despite the fact that maybe their efficiency isn't coming from knocking down threes.
Yes.
And that's just part of their game, and it all feeds on each other. You know, with its Doncic, one thing that I noticed that was fairly interesting is that he's terrible at making threes when he's tightly guarded, or, you know, relatively guarded. He shot something like 18% on guarded threes on a couple of game, maybe like 1.8 if I remember correctly.
Do you know offhand if those were late in games?
I have no idea when they were. You could probably cross-reference that with like when it happened over the course of a shot clock, or after how many dribbles. I didn't look at that. It was just based on how tightly he was guarded. So there is an incentive to close out on him, and you can't leave him open because he shoots much better when he is open. Still not great, like a touch below league average, but there is a built-in advantage to contesting him on those shots because he can't make them. So there's an interesting way that he does create gravity because of his passing, because of his dribbling, because he's so much better at shooting when no one is there, that like he creates the gravity, I would say, of a much better shooter than he would as a typical 32% shooter.
Right. 30. And it's interesting because like he had an amazing year, and I mentioned the Ben Falk thing, but he had a BPM 2 of 8.4. Like, he was a wonderful player despite his poor shooting from three. And my first inclination would be like, is his shooting while being covered and a circular thing, right? Like, no, because he's still a bad shooter when he's not being covered, and
but it's not that bad. Like, it's like 35%, and he also shoots at a high volume, which is different too. I mean, I think that's what people kind of get twisted when we talk about spacing. The idea that defenses will honor and respect and be forthright against a guy who shoots about league average on very few three-point attempts a game, and we see that like with Jeremy Grant. Like, he's never guarded on those because those are the only ones he takes. But because Luka chucks up 9 of them a game, you just are kind of aware of them all the time.
Yeah,
and to that point of like, if you don't guard them, 8 3-pointers a game at 35 to 36%, like, that's good offense.
Yeah, I mean, if you were the Milwaukee Bucks and you were playing the Mavs in the finals, you would kind of cheat towards Luka, but you wouldn't really get in his face, right? Like, 35% is real, but would you cover? Right. So my question is, let's say Luka Doncic and Jeremy Grant were on the same team. They were on the Mavs, and you were playing the Bucks, who are a wonderfully smart defensive team who gives up the most threes in the NBA, and you were tasked to cover them in a tight spot. Do you give the shot to Jeremy Grant, or do you give the shot to Luka? Because do you know where I'm going with this? Because Luka's,
like, if it's one shot, Yeah,
Sure,
I don't
or
know.
if it's a
It's
quarter.
tough.
Because
Well, yeah.
Jeremy Grant's numbers are good because he's not covered, but you don't cover him because he's not a good shooter. It gets confusing, right? Like, do you cover Luka Doncic because just getting a hand in his face brings down his percentage by 20 points? Or do you let
Not by
him...
20 points, by like a huge percentage. Oh, I know. I see what you're saying. 20 points.
Percentage.
Yeah, it basically makes him one of the worst shooters in the NBA.
Yeah. If you cover
him. From being average. I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah. So I would cover him, and I would drag his shooting percentage to the 318 that we see around there, him being defended. But I would still leave Jeremy Grant open too.
I went to try to look and see if Luka played Milwaukee this year. They didn't. That would have been interesting to see what their strategy was, because I'm with you, but there is also an argument to say we're not going to lose if Luka Doncic takes 23s and we just don't guard him out there, and say he shoots his average of 36%. Yeah. That gives them a half-court offensive rating of like 108. Mavs offensive rating as a team, I don't know what would be in the half court. That could be about what it is. But their overall offensive rating, when you include everything, was like what, 118, 116. Like there is an argument that the Bucks strategy, if applied to Luka Doncic, let his ass shoot as much as he wants, go under the screens, might work. Yeah,
totally. Like cheat away from him, and maybe guard Jeremy Grant. You can leave him open too, probably. But the knock on Luka has been his shooting, and I think people who don't have him on the top of the MVP vote tier is one because the Mavs aren't that good, which is whatever. He's still up there, but it's because people mention his shooting quite a bit. And
the Mavs as a team had an offensive rating of 117, which is significantly better than Luka just taking threes on an average night. So,
correct.
Not like a bad strategy.
Yeah, just let him bomb. God, I really love the Mavs because then if Porzingis is getting used correctly, then you have a problem, right? Because Porzingis, you can guard Porzingis, but not really. I mean, Giannis could try; he's tall enough, but like having Porzingis just kind of roaming on the arc provides an issue.
And this is also the beauty of Milwaukee's defense and the shift in strategy that we've just been discussing, of how Coach Bud went completely different in Atlanta because of the changing league and our changing understanding of spacing. And that they're like, no, we will give you threes. You can take as many as you want, basically. Yeah. We're going to try to defend good shooters, of course, but we're not going to let you just chuck with, elite shooters. Right. But we're just not letting you score at the rim. That's not happening.
Right.
We're just not doing that.
We're using trend against you. Right. If you're buying in on the idea that the three is the most important, valuable shot in the game, which it isn't, it's a free throw, but we'll let you have those because you can't really beat our team just with that volume of threes. And we're willing to give up the most threes in the league to win the most games in the league.
I mean, you can tell some teams tried it. Like the Spurs, he took 13 threes against the Spurs and made 5. That really.
You'll take that.
I'm saying you'll take that all day. He scored 42 points. It doesn't guarantee that it works. There was another game when he had 41 points and he went 6 of 13 against Detroit. So another game he went 3 of 12, and that's the kind of slim margins you're dealing with, because if you're letting him shoot them and he's comfortable and looking for them, and starts getting into a little bit of a groove, and he makes 2 more than you would expect statistically, now your strategy sucks.
Yeah. And this is the gamble I love when Daryl Morey takes this gamble, or D'Antoni, and they get criticized for this, but they're doing the fun, correct thing. And if he hits 2 more shots, then you're screwed.
So the real answer, and what Daryl Morey and D'Antoni are relying on, is that if you can, and the Bucks, on the total counter, is that if you can get up 50 3-pointers, you'll approach those averages, and those averages will be better than your opponent.
Right.
And the Bucks are doing the exact opposite on defense, saying if we can get you to only shoot threes, we think your offensive rating will approach what is expected, and those extra two that Luka Doncic makes will be countered by two misses that bring him more close to his average. So you'd want like Luka Doncic to take like 30 threes in order to make your strategy work.
And I love this because, and Morey's strategy is like, all right, we're going to remove an ethical player like Capella and add Covington. So we think his difference that he adds in our three-point shooting will just beat your strategy by the thinnest of margins, but we're willing to go all in there. It's awesome. These are chess moves, right?
Yeah, and the beauty, of course, is that a guy making two shots, Jeremy Grant going 4 of 6 from 3 versus 1 of 4, is like an enormous swing that could change like a championship.
Oh my God, for sure. It's wild.
It's like you just play the numbers and deal with the result. You know, Josh Smith got hot while playing for the Rockets and won a playoff series against the Clippers. Like that just happened. Josh Smith got hot.
Out of the league. Yeah, subsequently disappeared.
One of the worst shooters in NBA history from 3.
Yeah.
And he got hot, and Lob City got booted from the playoffs in a year when they were kind of set up to go against Golden State, maybe win a championship, and that would have been like a real incredible series. They had just knocked out the Spurs, who had wiped the floor with the Heat the previous season, and all of a sudden, Josh Smith changes the course of NBA history.
And we don't get Chris Paul in this game of horse because he's too big of a star. He says no to everything, right? And he's probably not even, maybe he still is, a players union rep. It just changes. Yeah, this is like some weird Paul Auster book. Like, it just changes the course of the entire NBA, and it's Josh Smith.
The Josh Smith butterfly flap.
You know, the Aston Kutcher movie, the Josh Smith butterfly effect. 2. But yeah, I mean, small sample size, man, and it sucks that we don't get these. In my opinion, this season's lost. I hope we get games and we get a champion, but it's just like the rhythm has been broken. So what we see now, to me, there's no continuity. So I see it as like a standalone tournament, and we won't see these.
I have no real thoughts on how this gets sorted out, and I don't think anyone does. It's kind of what we were saying before with de Blasio being like, September. And, all the sports commissioners getting on Zoom with Trump and being like, yeah, we want to get back to sports. And everyone's like, okay, but no one's going to sit in a stadium. All right, well, we're going to be on an island again. I'm like, I know, we came up with the island idea like literally a month ago. That's old news. The floating island, the household, that's the big 3. Yeah. So
it reminds me of exactly how like stats nerds are and how eye test people are in the NBA, because de Blasio saying like, I think we're back. Like, oh, you're just interested in being right, so you pushing it up is like the Price is Right. It's like, I bid $501, so you're that guy all of a sudden. And statisticians and scientists are, they make their money on being wrong. Like, being wrong is disappointing, but also as much information as being right. And I think, when you hear scientists say like maybe 2022, and I'm like, oh, you're being too scientisty, and de Blasio being like maybe in 2 weeks, I'm like, you're being too eye testy. It's like, and we know nothing still, and it's just people acting like how they usually act, like sort of like those start bench cut things. It's like, oh, you're just gonna pick the highest scorer and go down the line.
The start bench cut falls directly into the same paradigm of the Sixth Man of the Year award. Yeah. Ooh, you averaged 20 points. Yeah, that's a starter. Ironically, that's also your Sixth Man of the Year.
Yes. Yeah. The best of off the bench. People were going after Draymond Green. I think there was a dumb Twitter poll just like Pippen or Draymond, which is not fair because Pippen was awesome. But people, took that opportunity, as they do, to shit on Draymond Green. And Draymond Green is one of the most wonderful players in NBA history, man.
What we see repeatedly from these poor normies
Right.
is that passing and defense are chronically underrated.
Yeah.
You know, even people saying, well, what does Bill Laimbeer have to say about LeBron James versus Michael Jordan? He's just Bill Laimbeer. Bill Laimbeer, great defender, really good passer, efficient scorer. Laimbeer was amazing. He was not just a goon who like would elbow you in the throat every now and then. He was a fantastic player. And I think you could make a very convincing case that he had a bigger part to do with Detroit's success than even Isaiah Thomas, who benefit from a lot of those biases that we always talk about. He had a nice smile. He was a good dribbler. He was a scorer. He was a winner.
He crouched down low.
Good croucher. But, you know, he won a national championship at Indiana. He was a winner. He had this beautiful smile and charm. He was a star. He was exciting to watch. Bill Laimbeer was lumpy. And maybe now we could look at him and say he's a lot like Marc Gasol. An elite defensive player, a very good passer, efficient. Like he could just do everything, and he helps you on every part of the floor. Meanwhile, you know, Isaiah was not that efficient as a scorer. He was not a great defender, and those teams won with defense. This is not really shitting on Isaiah. He was a great player, but in retrospect, the way that we respect those attributes, like scoring, like passing and defense and efficiency, have been elevated. And we still are underestimating. We still are underestimating how good guys like Draymond or Ben Simmons or even Marc Gasol really were.
And chasing hypocrisy is boring, but you know, Laimbeer was loved by the enforcer community, being like, "Ooh, he's that toughness of that era," and he would just like knock the socks off. I sound like Joe Biden. He would just like. He would take your lunch, you know, like these players are soft compared to him. But at the same time, we actually celebrate the finesse player in Isaiah Thomas. And I think you bring up Laimbeer for a good reason, right? Because yesterday on, I believe, a radio show, he came out in favor of LeBron James as the best player of all time over Michael Jordan. And he is correct. What do you think?
Of course he's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
emphatically
sure.
correct. Emphatically, yes.
And respect to Bill Laimbeer, because unlike a lot of these other guys who seem to be sort of bound to their generation and tied to their own accomplishments, I think if Bill Laimbeer said we lost to Jordan, who was the greatest of all time, you know, he beat us. No shame in that. And we beat Jordan. There's pride in that. He went against his own self-interest. You know, he's like John Cusack endorsing Bernie Sanders. But he went against his own legacy. He went against his own story of being a champion with the Detroit Pistons and an enforcer and all that kind of stuff to say, no, I think the guy from today is better than the guy that we exchanged body blows with back 20, 30 years ago. And I think that was cool. And I think part of it is that he coaches in the NBA. He is around modern athletes. He sees them on a day-to-day basis and knows how things have changed and knows how the game has evolved and adapted. And I think that was really cool that Bill Laimbeer did that. And for being someone who is so closely identified with glorifying of the 90s and the 80s of like tough guy talk and the real men do real things, Laimbeer coming out and saying something that's, to me, quite obvious, was also pretty cool and honestly unexpected.
Yeah, and the only pushback that the Jordan, and there's, 90% Jordan support on Twitter, but it's like Laimbeer's always had it out for Jordan. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me here. And it's like perfect in the finals. And I'm like, well, we can relitigate that again and again and again. And fair enough. Okay, let's give that to the Jordan fans, but LeBron James can guard and play all 5 positions. He's still at the peak of his career, like a zillion years later. He's a basketball genius in the same way Michael Jordan was. And I'm sorry, he's just bigger and he's more versatile and he's a better overall player than Michael Jordan.
And that was one of Laimbeer's points. And I don't love the phrase "made his teammates better." I think,
Yeah, me neither.
I think carrying your team to a win makes your teammates better too. But I think he was talking about that it took Jordan a little while, even after coming out of, I believe, 2 years? 2 years at North Carolina, I think. It took him a little while to sort of become a better passer and less of just sort of a singular scorer.
It took Scottie Pippen
right.
for him to be Michael Jordan.
Yeah, and I think the point that LeBron was who he was, no matter who was around him. And we never really saw LeBron become better because of his teammates. His teams may have gone further, but LeBron has been LeBron. He was this guy as a rookie, and he's this guy on the Lakers or the Cavs or the Heat. And right, the ceiling for team performance is obviously connected to who's around him. It's also the same guy who took some pretty beat up teams into the finals and did his thing.
Daniel Marshall.
I mean, that one team, that beat the Pistons, there was no one on that team. No one. And then, and he just rattled off 24 points in the fourth quarter of a critical game. Like, he just did that.
Him switching on defense to guard power forwards is just incredible.
He guarded Derrick Rose in a crucial scenario, and then he guarded like Pau Gasol against the Lakers, in a different series, or not series, but in a different game. Like his versatility defensively when he needed it, was
when
just
the team
outlandish.
asked for it. Yeah, man, and him morphing from a point guard from when he came out to a small forward to a power forward back to a point guard, depending on what his team needed, is just incredible and should never be understated. He can do everything on the court.
And what I really loved about both of these guys, and specifically LeBron, is that you would watch him put together a game, even the one against Golden State where J.R. Smith had a brain fart and they ended up losing that, where LeBron would just put up a masterpiece. He was like, that was a virtuoso at his best. And they lost that game, but it was just, there is no higher level of basketball that you could achieve. Like the points he put up, the playmaking, as you said, versatile defensively. You're just like, this is it. This is basketball at its peak form, and we're watching it. And MJ did that kind of thing too.
He's awesome.
But I just feel like, considering where LeBron is, the fact that he has done this since he was a rookie, and it's those masterpieces. I think that's the coolest shit. When you watch guys like him or Chris Paul, James Harden sometimes, when they put together one of those games, you're just like, that's the best basketball I've ever seen. That was it. That shit was crazy.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Like, we're so used to LeBron now. It's like, what is that, like 28, 15, and 12? But he lost. I'm like, what chef's kiss, man? What was that? It's too bad the interns also have Kevin Durant better than Michael Jordan. That's a debate for a different episode, I would think.
Yeah, that's a strange one. But I mean, the interns are crazy. They are, especially now, they're getting even less cruel.
Are they the de Blasios of takes? Just being like, we're just going to one-up the last take.
They're at peak performance, putting up masterpieces on a daily basis. Just like us.
Cookies.
Cookies!